Admiralty was very busy charting all the world's waters. Of course, Britain was the premier maritime nation, and they did an incredible amount of charting. This map shows this was the red coastlines was what they charted after 1800. The blue was areas they had charted before 1800. So going all the way up the west coast of Alaska here. So I think it's sort of an underappreciated fact that much of the world was charted by the Royal Navy. One of the individuals who was involved in this effort was George Richards. George Richards was a naval captain who came out in 1857 because at that time Britain and the United States had come to an agreement about the boundary between Oregon and British possessions on the west coast, the so-called Oregon Treaty, and so they had agreed between them to establish a boundary commission who would draw the boundary. I know it's confusing because the boundary really has nothing to do with Oregon. It's got a lot to do with the state of what became the state of Washington. Anyway, there was a commission, so Richards was sent out to survey, along with an American colleague, the boundary between Britain and the U.S. And then he was here for 5 years, and he arrived in 1857. In 1858, there was the big gold rush, which brought 20,000 potential miners through Victoria, and they went on over to the Fraser. So there was sort of a burst of activity here, and he was involved in the boundary. His other mission was to chart the coast, because Hudson's Bay Company had moved its operation north. Britain was now interested in this area, so he operated in a ship called HMS Plumber. We got a wonderful model of the Plumber back there. And when he went home in 1863, he wrote up the first sailing directions for this area. In the 19th century, the Admiralty were not only producing charts, but they were producing books which would guide mariners. And so he produced this little book, the Vancouver Island Pilot. As a mariner, he was really underwhelmed by Victoria Harbor. And he says it's, doubtless Victoria Harbor is susceptible to improvement by artificial means. Well, it was improbable that it can never be made a safe and convenient port of entry for vessels of even moderate tonnage. The problem was, of course, that the entrance is quite convoluted, and it wasn't all that deep. He calls it, the space is so confined and tortuous that a longship has considerable difficulty in making the necessary turn. Now, a couple of pages earlier, he described Esquimalt, because Esquimalt was a much better harbor, and still is. It's a safe and excellent anchorage for ships of any size. So he wrote that up. The mission came in. This was 1864. By 1883, they published a supplement, which would update the book. Now, these books are, of course, are still being done. This early sailing directions is really just a guide to the coast. The more modern ones are kind of a little mini encyclopedia. They describe the country, they tell about the government, they give information about the climate. They were really a tremendous source of information until the advent of the internet. Of course, now navigators can just Google Vancouver and find out all they need to know. But
that early part, when I was mentioning that Victoria Harbor, he's probably right, because they were all just sailing vessels back then.
Right, exactly.
And how that harbor is always windy, and it's hard to maneuver.
That's right.
And even the ships that have been in there used to have tugs assisting them.
Right.
So he was right. it's a very difficult harbor, back then.
Of course, he was right as a Royal Navy officer. No, yeah, no. I wonder why they did establish the trading post there. Other than we know that there was at the time a lot of the area around Victoria had been cleared by the First Nations and to foster the growth of camas bulbs, and so it was it was sort of an open area, and it was very inviting. Whereas Esquimalt, I think, was ringed by dense forest. Now it happened that some Royal Navy sailors built a trail in 1852 from Esquimalt across to Victoria. So when the gold rush came in 1858, a lot of the gold rush miners, potential miners, who came from California, really landed in Esquimalt, and Hudson's Bay Company established a warehouse there as well. Anyway, so and that Richards initially worked in a sailing ship called the HMS Plumper, and then he wrote home to the Admiralty and said, the Plumper's got various limitations, and how about sending out a steam-powered ship? And of course, by that time, the Beaver was on the coast. The Beaver had arrived in the mid-1830s, and the Admiralty sent out a paddle wheel survey ship called HMS Hecate. So he did surveys in the Plumper and then in the Hecate, and they produced charts. In fact, it's interesting. They would go out during the summer and do in spring and do their surveys. Then in the fall they would be back in Esquimalt, and they would work up their sketches and produce the charts. And they did get some early charts printed in New Westminster by the Royal Engineers. Most of the charts were done in London or elsewhere in the UK. And now this is a map of Vancouver Island, which in fact is published. This edition was published in 1917. This was published in 1917. They listed all the corrections so that mariners would know that it was up to date. Those corrections. I think it's an interesting map for many reasons. One of them is that there's the Fraser River is very clear distance shown. The Harrison Lake there, the area up to a little bit, because of course that was a water route to the interior, using steamboats. Lots of soundings here in the entrance to the Strait of Juan de Fuca, which of course was an area which could be missed, had been missed when Captain Vancouver skirted up the coast. When Captain Cook went up the coast, he missed the Strait of Juan de Fuca altogether. Captain Vancouver did not. Captain Vancouver spent 3 years in this area, and he thoroughly surveyed the whole area. This is just a more detailed one of the area around Victoria. And again, there are these nifty drawings here of what the various areas in the coastline look like, so that a navigator, when he approached the coast for the first time, could sort of line things up. And many modern sailing directions still had these old copper plate drawings. They started replacing them in the 20th century with photographs, but the photographs never were able to convey the same sort of three-dimensional view that you would get. Whereas when Captain Vancouver came out, his mission was to negotiate with the Spanish about the status of a settlement at Nootka, and his mission also was to chart the area, which he did very thoroughly. And Captain Cook, Captain Vancouver, so it's incredible that they did a lot of work in small boats. They would locate there. He had 2 ships. They would locate in a sort of a base for several weeks, and they would send these little boats off, make these long voyages, and so in these little open boats, they were able to make observations and sketches and establish the outlines of the coast. This is when Captain Vancouver's journals were published. They included a drawing of Observation Inlet. Now, Observation Inlet is what they set up an observatory there to locate the position exactly, but they also that's where they that's where they sent a lot of their small boat expeditions from. Where is Observation Inlet? It's northeast of Prince Rupert. It's it's where in modern times there was a settlement of Antiochs where there was a big